So, yeah, this seemed like a sort of starting point, because, that was the starting point of being councillors for Lucy and I. I know somewhere I've got a picture of an equivalent stage for Gareth being a councillor back in 2007, but I wasn't able to fish that one out. So what happened next? I think we can sort of start with this. So I had quite a few surprises. And one of them was that there was just so much to read for meetings, where I'm finding documents of hundreds of pages aren't unusual, and I feel like I'm getting away lightly with it if I've only got about 30,000 words to read for a meeting. Something else that was a bit of a surprise was the timings. So there's a 6:30 very prompt start to virtually every meeting, including committee meetings. And I'm not used to evening meetings starting at 6:30, and I'm not used to meetings being right. We're starting because the clock is ticked over the 1 extra second to be the scheduled time, but you get used to it. But at the same time, we got that formality and precision. But what I found, which I wasn't sort of aware of previously, was how constructive and collegiate committee meetings can often be. And on that, they're quite different from full council meetings, which are a mix of being nice to the members of the public who present a petition, and then party political point scoring that can get very petty at times. Although something in common between many committee meetings and full council meetings is the sitting through presentations and trying to pay sufficient attention to the presentation, where you've already basically got the information in your pack in advance of however many 100,000 words it is. So then what else about being a councillor? I think one of the things that I've really been pleased about is the ability to make a difference. Some of that, as with this picture, is the ability to use our ward funds, money that the council allocates for us to be able to spend around the ward over the 2-year period. And so we were able to pay for the planting of this swathe of bulbs. And we've also been able to pay for things like dip curbs in quite a lot of places around the ward, and some funding for what's now Impact, used to be YMCA Bedfordshire, who are providing food for homeless and people in need. And so we were able to help them out with some of the stuff that they really needed to continue providing that service to people. So that was great and helped the local area. And we've got big plans for another bit of spending, which I'd love to say at the moment, but we're having to keep it under wraps just for a little bit longer. Then other ways of making a difference. I think one of the key things has been making sure that some of the key policy arguments that ought to be made actually are made. And I feel like we've been able to get the Lib Dems and Labour out of their complacency on the council on some issues, where they sort of like to pretend that they're the greenest that it's possible to be. And then when they have Green Party councillors, saying, well, no, actually, you're doing this wrong and that wrong, there's a little bit of embarrassment factor there, which hopefully means that they pay more attention and try to avoid being embarrassed like that in future. Something that really struck me when Lucy and I were elected was there were quite a lot of council officers who privately talked to us sort of saying, they were really glad that we were elected because it would mean that there was going to be a true green perspective on the council rather than the pseudo green that had been the case. And then another aspect of making a difference is representing the interests of residents and the ward. And so Lucy and I both spend time on making submissions about planning applications and applications for alcohol licenses within the ward. And there's a pretty constant stream of those to keep us busy. And there's an element of, well, we pick the ones where we think it's most important rather than automatically commenting on every single thing. But then when we do, we're also trying to sort of take a broader view than just, well, what would any good councillor for this ward say, but also, some elements of, well, how does this fit within a wider green view? And so, repeatedly making emphasis on provision for cyclists, for example, in planning applications. And so personal pluses, well, one of the things has been, it's been good to have an increased profile in the local media. So, this story wouldn't have got reported if it had just been me not being a councillor, whereas because I was, it became more newsworthy. Now, of course, that's got a flip side. You don't want to end up on the wrong side of a story which wouldn't get reported about something that you really didn't want them to report. Fortunately, we've not been in that situation, but there's a sort of nagging wariness about that as well. There's also been situations where I've got a real sense of achievement when I've got some casework settled for a resident. And so, in this case, I had locals saying to me, well, for our block of flats, we keep running out of recycling space because the recycling bins are quite small. We've only got 2 of them. And if you just see sort of between the left hand of the recycling bins and my hat, you can see a much bigger black waste bin there, a whopping great skip thing, and they've got 2 of those as well. And so, I was at least able to get a 3rd orange recycling bin provided for them. That's one of the minor ways. There are all sorts of other ways that I've been able to help particular individuals. And there are some ongoing where I've got individuals that are very grateful, but I can't talk about them in public in the same way. But it can be a real buzz when you actually achieve a result for someone. I think another thing is that I've ended up with a real feeling of pride in my ward. And it's brilliant to hear locals being positive about what we've achieved. So this is a picture of us doing a socially distanced litter pick last October. Part of the feeling pride in the ward, but there's been all sorts of little things, from getting a street name put back on a street, and there's other places where residents of a tower block are sort of saying, the word's going around that you're really good, and that's really a warm fuzzy when you get people say things like that about you. And of course, there's the feeling that I'm helping the Green Party grow locally and nationally. And something else I've got to admit that I do get out of it, which is very useful, is my councillor allowance, which means that I've got money to live on when I wouldn't do otherwise. So it's not all in terms of helping other people out. I do get something very, very directly there myself. Yeah, and there are downsides. Some casework problems are really difficult to make progress on, like this particular site for rubbish, which gets terrible, is incredibly difficult to get the landowners to clear. And this whopping great pile, which was stinking and had got flies all over it, I can see one or two in the picture, that ended up being cleared by a resident rather than the landowner. And I was a bit annoyed that the resident let the landowner off the hook, but I could also understand it was disgusting. And it was really frustrating that we weren't able to get that dealt with better by the people that ought to have been dealing with it. Other downsides, well, some people like to have a go just because they disagree with us politically, and actually getting much really substantial change in the council, change to council politics, policies, for example, that will either require quite a lot more councillors and or a dramatic shift in the balance between the existing largest three parties. The way things are at the moment, they can very happily shut us out of any real power within the council, which is frustrating, but that's the situation of a lot of councillors up and down the country, and a very high proportion of Greens. But at the same time, we do get bigger achievements from time to time. Even with the way things are. So Lucy put together the motion about a food strategy, which was passed by the council meeting. And that was a really lovely success. Although, even that was at the cost of the other parties using it as an excuse to pat themselves on the back. But they have enough power to mean that they can force any motion ending up including we pat ourselves on the back lines as well. So that's sort of where I am to start with, at least. Lucy, you're silent.
How am I still making a mistake with mute? I don't know. Sorry. Thank you, Ben. You've covered a lot, and so there's not so much for me to say. I'll try not to repeat myself or repeat you. So firstly, I would say that a lot of people don't know what a councillor is at all. Even when we knock on the door and you say you're a local councillor, people go, "Oh, what's that? Is that like the MP?" Or they're not clear what you do. So I try and explain to people what we do, which I think is representing the ward we were elected for and giving people a voice, especially those who aren't generally heard at all. And Castle is really mixed with real deprivation, especially in the Midland Road area and around the station, but also with immense wealth on the embankment and Rothesay and Bushmead, for example. So that's one thing, giving people a voice. Another, as Ben said, is trying to develop council policy where we have the opportunities and scrutinising decisions taken by the executive, especially when we do have opportunities. But as Ben said, that's often frustrating, and we tend to be sort of silenced, or credit is taken for things that we've struggled to achieve. And then also, I think as a councillor, there's a sort of community leadership role, which as Ben has said, really where there are challenges that need to be faced, whether it's just an ongoing issue to do with, fly tipping or criminal activity in an area. It's kind of up to us to sort of problem solve. And I think a lot of being a councillor is a problem solving exercise, which I quite like, actually. It's something I sort of find satisfying, but obviously we don't always manage to solve the problems. And another aspect of being a councillor is to manage expectations, because I think a lot of people were really pleased when Greens were elected, because we were the first Greens in Bedford, but also people after the sort of blow of the election result and didn't we do well, there's a sense of managing expectation to say we can't work miracles and there are just two of us. in a little opposition, but I think we are a vocal opposition. We make our voices heard, and we don't sit quietly. So what can be achieved? Well, fundamentally, in Castle at the sort of basic level is making the ward a nicer, safer place to live. And the emphasis we always put on was safer for people, because everyone deserves to live somewhere that's safe. And for me, that links really closely with health and well-being and inequalities, because some parts of this ward are a lot safer and more pleasant to live in than others. Making the ward greener in all senses. So we've done a lot of tree planting, spend a lot of our ward funds on trees and planting areas. See if I can share an image. Actually, I have got some, can I share an image? This I'm really proud of, because it looked exactly like the packet of seeds did, which doesn't always happen in my garden when slugs come along. But this was our ward funded wildflower planting, which is still doing pretty well in Russell Park. So this was something that I think people have really enjoyed, and it's been a real visual sort of a symbol of what greens do, because we don't just want neat cut grass, we want biodiversity, we want richness, we want colour, and a lot of people have said it's given them real pleasure. So it's a sort of symbol really, I think, and tree planting as well. So I don't know, can you see that? Can you see the tree? No, I've done something odd.
I've still got the wildflowers.
I have to unshare, don't I? Should have practiced this, shouldn't I? I'm just going to leave the wildflowers there for now. Anyway, we've also spent a lot on trees, making the ward a safer place to live, as I said, and that means working with council officers and multiple other agencies. I never realised how many agencies there were involved. And this is from things like tackling crime and antisocial behaviour, to domestic violence, to fly tipping, potholes, broken street lights, antisocial behaviour, crime. These are all issues that we're sort of trying to deal with on a weekly, if not daily basis. And I think for me, a lot of it is about empowering residents so that they see a difference and they report problems. Because I think from the start, we said, don't put up with it, report, here's how you report it, let us help you and show you how to report things. And then people would say, oh, I reported it and it got cleared up. So just a thing like that, letting people know how they can access those tools online is really important. But on the other hand, we know a lot of people who are digitally excluded and they're not able to do that. So we will do that for them, you know, if they're not able to, and try and make sure we get a good result for them. And alongside that is getting people's trust and helping them engage with their sort of community and the community needs. So, for example, when we were at Flats recently, I got chatting to one resident, this is on Goldington Road, Ben, in the Heron House, and then we were talking for so long about various different issues that another resident who'd been upstairs, who I'd always also chatted to, came down. These two had got chatting together, and we were talking about some problems, and they thought perhaps they could start setting up a residents association, because they both had some similar issues, and they both felt quite isolated, because although where they live is nice and it's really quite pleasant, they said the corridors are really quiet, they never see anyone, they don't know any of their neighbours. So, you know, I said, let me help you, let me keep in touch, let me know how you do, and talked about some ideas how to engage neighbours and other residents, because obviously as a team they can achieve a lot more. So about empowering people, I think that's a lot of what of being a councillor is about, really. So the highs and lows, I would echo all of the ones Ben said, really. I have to say COVID really was quite a shocker, because we'd only been councillors for 9 months, hadn't we, really, when suddenly there were these really quite extraordinary extra demands, and it was a pretty scary time. So there were demands in terms of obviously food, accessing food, issues with schools and isolation, and for a lot of elderly people, real loneliness. So I had just people phoning me up on the sort of pretext of asking what the infection rates were, but really just wanting a chat. And so if I couldn't talk to them and them, I would make sure I phoned them later, or I was picking recycling up for a few elderly residents from their doorstep. bottles to go to the bottle bank, for example, and would just wave through the window. So it's just little things like that that aren't really a councillor's job, but it was very little extra work for me, but it helped sort of build some relationships in some blocks of flats in particular. So I'm also a school governor, which many councillors are, and helping getting usable tablets and laptops donated was really satisfying, because the IT department at the school was good enough that it was able to fit those up. While unfortunately the government delayed getting those laptops because Castle Newnham had to wait an extraordinary long time, and the promises they were made were really not kept at all. In terms of food, Ben and I did a special hunger leaflet, making sure that people knew about the various options, including the larder and sort of the community larder on Greyfriars, that is, and also about food bank referrals, because we were able to do that. And we wanted people to know that there was support, and there was, you know, we were able to help them and signpost them, but we needed them, they needed us to help with that information. So after we delivered that particular leaflet, literally the next day I got a phone call from a couple who just moved into, I think it was Batterson Street off Midland Road. So they were really pleased that because of our leaflet, they'd gone to the larder and they got themselves some food. So they were thrilled about that, but they didn't have an oven or a microwave or anything, because they just moved into, they had been rough sleepers, and they had just been moved into a tiny flat, but it had no cooking facilities and hardly any furniture. But cooking facilities were the main thing. So through Bedford kindness, I managed to get them an oven and microwave, and we delivered them literally that night, and they were thrilled. And that, things like that really make a difference. You think it's just two people, but you're making a real difference to their lives. So they were able to cook the food rather than just eating sandwiches every day. So another COVID role for us has been sharing info on support available, making sure people know individuals' financial support is available, and also businesses, the support that was available to them. So Ben and I spent a lot of time phoning up businesses, making sure that they weren't missing out on things that were available to them, because, you know, there was money available from the government, and we didn't want Castle businesses not being able to access that. Also sharing information all the way through about changing restrictions in the local COVID rates, which we've both done. And I'm on the local outbreak engagement board, and that's part of our role, is really to keep that dialogue open with the public so that they have the information and they're able to ask questions and find out what's going on, because it's been an anxious time for people, obviously. Ben's mentioned the food strategy motion. I was really proud of that, even though it was moderated slightly, and other parties took credit largely, but we still got our press release published. And so we realized that we have to, if someone's not going to get credit for an idea that we've got, we have to be pretty quick getting a press release out about it. And obviously the press will try and have a balanced view and include all views, but we want to make sure our voice isn't lost in there, because we are only two, but we have to make ourselves heard as a green voice. So the food strategy motion anyway will focus on food inequality and sustainability, but unfortunately because of COVID, meaningful work on that has been delayed, because as you can imagine, council public health officers are really pushed to the limit, and there are very few of them. And another high for me, really, thinking about sort of highs and lows, is sort of air quality and seeing vehicle idling signs go up after years of campaigning, because I was campaigning on this long before I was a councillor, and I was measuring air quality outside schools about 4 years ago, and trying to share information with schools about vehicle idling. So that was, I can't unfortunately see how to share a picture, but anyway, if you go past various schools, including the girls' school, that was the first one that we managed to get up, and it's been adopted in other wards. So there are various of these outside other wards which are helping to raise awareness about air quality and young people's lungs. So I've mentioned the trees and the wildflowers. And another really important thing has been helping individuals who really just didn't expect anyone ever to help them. And I found that really sort of satisfying, when you feel like often you're not getting very far, because you do meet a lot of obstacles when you're a councillor, and especially when you're a councillor, when there are only two of you, and it's quite hard sometimes to get things done, but often on an individual level you can make a, 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 difference to individuals' lives or groups of people. So, for example, we've done things to help with issues because of ineffective housing associations and landlords getting people their rightful council tax reduction, helping sort out issues to do with persistent antisocial behaviour or noise nuisance in people's streets. Even things, it might sound a small thing, but it's often the small things, is getting someone a free replacement bin when their bin's been stolen several times and they're told they have to pay £40 for a new one. And this is a resident who's very conscientious about their rubbish and their recycling and tidies up outside their house. And then when they get their bin stolen by someone who's moved in next door or around the corner and doesn't have a bin or has a really dodgy landlord, getting them a free replacement bin after a few phone calls, it's a small thing, but it's really satisfying. So yeah, things like that are they make it all worthwhile to keep going. I think when people just send you a text going thank you, that made a big difference. Another thing was, for example, on an individual level, was getting an area behind a local woman's house cleared of vegetation so that dozens of syringes could be safely cleared, because this had been an issue that was ongoing. And she didn't want to cut the vegetation herself because she knew there were lots of syringes. So eventually that was sorted, and she said, this is amazing, you knocked on my door. This is how we heard out about the issue. And she said, and then you came round and you knocked on my door to tell me it was being sorted. And she said, I never expected that. And she said, when I left you a message, you phoned me back that evening and I never expected that to happen. So often people have quite low expectations and they're surprised when politicians help them and when they respond to them. Another issue Ben and I had, again from door knocking, is we visited Poulter Close. It must have been last year. I remember it was very hot. And we picked up lots of problems from the Housing Association there, Clarion, who were really, is this libelous? Because this is probably, I won't say too much, except there were lots of repair jobs that hadn't been sorted and there were rotten windows. Almost every resident mentioned rotten drafty windows and damp. So after quite a few emails and phone calls, and eventually having to go to someone very senior in desperation and finally getting a response, proper cleaning started to happen. And Clarion decided to replace all the windows finally. So one resident with quite severe mental health problems, who I'd been in touch with quite a bit, he said he felt listened to for the first time. And he was, you know, he just said, this has made a massive difference to my mental health, because he was just struggling, feeling constantly ignored when he was phoning up, being on hold on the helpline. And then you give up, don't you? And nothing gets better. So it seems like the small things, but the small things are the big things. And I think as a sort of individual councillors, that's often the sort of bread and butter of what we're doing. So Ben's mentioned planning, helping oppose those planning applications that are really the sort of priority ones, often by egregious landlords who don't care about the community, or developments that are contrary to the declaration of the climate emergency. One, just for example, is the council's plan for another drive-through McDonald's, which I opposed. As soon as I spotted it, I shared widely to get a good number of objections, because this is actually the council working with McDonald's to build a new drive-through, as if we don't have enough drive-throughs, and actively encouraging people to eat food that's not very good for you and not very good for the planet. And not only that, but to drive there, because yeah, you couldn't make it up, could you? Anyway, another issue has been the high street, the sort of high and the low, really, because well, I say I failed to get a south-north cycle route. It had already been sort of decided that it wasn't going to happen. And Ben and I kept saying there is space. We constantly pestered for that route because we felt it was important. But no, the answer was no, there wasn't room. So they've made the pavement very wide, and we feel there could have been a south and north cycle route that would have been really valuable for the network. But I did consistently pester too for the promised 9 trees on the high street, because I felt those were important. And I thought if there's a get out clause, they might quietly shelve those and not install them. So some of the trees looked in doubt because of apparently unexpected underground utilities, which hadn't been on the map. I've been in touch with the engineer in charge of the project most weeks just to say, how are the trees doing? Are you managing to do those trees pits? Have you found alternative tree pits? And so far it's looking really good. There are still a question mark over a couple of them, but it's a small thing again, but if there were 9 trees on the map, I want those 9 trees there. You just have to work a little bit harder to find alternatives if there are unexpected utilities. So another high and a low altogether was electric vehicle charge points for people who don't have off-street parking. So obviously in a lot of these terraced streets, there are no garages, there's nowhere to charge your electric vehicle, and there is quite a bit of growing demand, especially at the east end of Castle Ward, where there's more affluence and people are, they're wanting to make the switch. So quite a few people asked us, and we sort of thought about various suitable points that would have minimum impact on people but have maximum potential use. And so we got a lot of thanks when Russell Avenue charging points were installed. On the other hand, I got some very vitriolic emails and WhatsApps from people saying this is outrageous, and on Facebook because of parking congestion, because people felt it was taking away what was rightfully their parking, even though we were very careful to make sure none of the charging points were directly outside people's houses. They were not in front of people's houses at all. They were in other locations. But parking gets people very incensed, as I'm sure Ben will agree. It's one of those things that people are very attached to their cars and parking, and they expect to be able to park very close to their house. So moving on, what is absolutely vital as being as a councillor, I would say, as Ben said, being at every committee and reading all those copious papers. And that's the thing I find hardest too, because some of them are incredibly dense and quite technical, and you have to really allow the time, and you've got to go through forensically and think, what questions should I be asking? Am I seeing through this dense stuff to the nub of what's being proposed here, or the nub of what's happening? And I think I'm getting better at that. But I think I'm a naturally trusting person. Well, I was a naturally trusting person, but maybe as a councillor, you become gradually more sceptical about things. I'm getting better at saying, hang on a minute, what does this really mean? So anyway, I should say that we get almost no choice about what committees we sit on, because we're in such a minority party. But I sit on health overview and scrutiny, and we've concentrated a lot on place-based care, health inequalities, barriers to healthcare such as language or learning disability, which I particularly wanted on the agenda, and also things like Care Quality Commission ratings, which we've scrutinised. So people will be familiar with the maternity services getting a very, very poor rating this time last year. And so we were able to call them up in front of the committee to be, well, interrogated really. So shortage of midwives is at the crux of it. But yeah, things like that are really good opportunities to make sure we can really make a difference. And I have to say, on those scrutiny committees, it is a very collegiate, collaborative atmosphere, as Ben was saying. It's generally not very party political. It's, we're thinking about our residents and what's best for Bedford people. And no one really disagrees that maternity services should be A1. No one accepts that they should be poor and women or babies should be at risk. I'm also on the licensing committee, which is generally a bit less interesting. It's about taxes and private hire standards, but also about licensed premises. And Ben's already said about when we feel it's sensible and appropriate to object to new premises or renewal of premises licenses. And finally, I'm on the, well, not finally, actually, there's another one I haven't mentioned, but penultimately, I'm on the Climate Change Committee. And as people will know, Bedford Borough declared a climate emergency and has committed to being carbon neutral by 2030. So obviously, there's all sorts of permutations about how that should and could happen. And there has been a general sense of complacency. This is the committee that I feel more on edge at, because I often feel I'm being fobbed off because it's an executive committee and I don't have voting rights on it. And I'm also being told about past achievements in glowing terms rather than the urgency of the now. So I'm always trying to press them to say, okay, yes, you did that 5 years ago. Yes, you did that 3 years ago. Well done. But what about now? And what about next 6 months? And what about the next year? So it's challenging that complacency, which is our really important role, and really challenging half-hearted measures which don't challenge the status quo, really. One thing I think is really important that we do is to suggest to other local Greens and activists of all sorts to ask questions at committees, because often people don't know they can do that. And virtually that's very easy. If people have some digital access, then it's not difficult to do, and the clerks are really helpful. And I think it's really great to see members of the public in the committees, and the committees like to see people there. I think it's quite a novelty when someone turns up with a question or questions. So sharing that more is really important. For example, tomorrow night is the Environment Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and I'm not on that committee. I wish I was. But one of the agenda items is air quality, referring to Ampthill Road, for example, monitoring of the pollution there, but also crucially Covanta and what the council's roles and responsibilities are. So I've been sharing that, not least on the Covanta, anti-Covanta Facebook page, to let them know that, you know, this is your opportunity if you want to come and ask something. So I hope people do. So to sum up, it's quite a challenge, and it is sometimes frustrating, and it's obviously busy, but when we do get victories, however small, we have to make sure people know about them, and we do that through newsletters and press releases. So we really want people to see the Green Party works hard. You might not always agree with us, but we work hard and we care about residents, and we want more Green councillors because we want people to feel they can trust them. One other thing I should mention is that I'm on the corporate parenting panel. And this is all about looked after children, and I've got a particular interest in young people leaving care and making sure they get what they're entitled to, and also making sure that the council, which is a corporate parent, it's a horrible term, isn't it, but to make sure that the council meets that responsibility, but also meets it with real ambition, so that we have a real ambition for young people leaving care, so that they really reach their potential. Because there's a danger young people in care if they don't have that support, they're going to be vulnerable in different ways, and that will affect the rest of their lives. So that's something that's really important to me. And going to the young people's in care celebrations pre-COVID, I really enjoyed as well. And I have to say, Children's Services do a great job at that. Something I'm really proud of about this council. Another important council activity that Ben and I do every week is listening to residents' needs through door knocking, because you've got to listen to people, haven't you? So we don't do surgeries anymore because people didn't tend to turn up, and it's so I would just basically check my emails while I was waiting for people to turn up, and mostly people didn't turn up because they didn't know what to ask or who we were or where, you know, what it was all about. But when you door knock, it's a whole different ball game, because we're going to people, we're the ones putting ourselves out. And I think people often appreciate it, don't they, Ben? They say, thank you. Sometimes people say, when's the election, assuming we're wanting their vote. And we say, no, we're just here to see if you're okay and if there are any issues, and to give you our contact details. So, and people are often a bit taken aback that we're not asking them for anything. We're not asking them to commit to vote to us. So yeah, keeping in touch with people, really important. Getting newsletters through letterboxes, being visible. So unfortunately that means taking more selfies than I used to be comfy with, but we have to do that to show what we're doing. So yeah, Ben always reminds me, if we don't take a photo, it didn't happen. And then when the next newsletter comes out, we have to be shown physically. People like to see evidence of what you've done. And of course we have to regularly keep an eye on social media, acting on any casework we pick up from that, and a lot of problem solving as well. So what is it recommended that you do as a councillor? So I would say network, from the very first day, getting to know as many local community groups and public bodies and charities as possible. We regularly meet police, attend neighbourhood watch meetings before COVID, obviously. I keep in touch with Bedford Beard, especially about greening the town centre. So I'm trying to build a good relationship there, and also the Green Business Network, which is really excellent. Another thing, apart from networking, is really to be seen to doing the practical stuff, getting your hands dirty. I think Ben is rarely to be seen going along without a litter pick stick in a bag. He can't travel anywhere without scooping up rubbish on the way. So, and obviously we've organised litter picks as well, especially after the winter floods. We did our own individually because it was during lockdown, but lots of residents did as well. They were going on their walks and their jogs, picking up all the plastic that was caught up in the river and the vegetation there. Another really important thing as a councillor is to support all those groups that we have common goals with. So things like Hands Off Bedford Hospital, which a few Greens are involved in opposing privatisation of the NHS. Above all, we both went to the Black Lives Matter events in Bedford last summer, wanting to stand up for anti-racism, not just non-racism. Sharing information and data from the cycling campaign for North Beds, really useful resource, and I try and sort of amplify that voice. Volunteering for the community larder, which Ben and I have both done for a good while. Also talking to homelessness advocates like the excellent charity Just Us, and I went to their training events when I was first a councillor to know what homelessness law was really all about, because they know everything, and massively useful what I've learned from them, so that when I'm faced with someone who is in danger of homelessness, I feel better equipped. And also I'll often refer them to Just Us in any case. So the sort of icing on the cake activities, if you've got time, which often we don't, but things like potentially going to museum exhibition or art gallery openings, we get invites, and if they're in our ward, if I can, I will go along, and often it's a bit of a rush, but it's actually, all the ones I've been to so far have been an opportune moment to chat to people about issues, and you find out stuff and meet people that you wouldn't otherwise have done. So for example, I went to one shortly after we were first elected, and it was about the history of jail, and I met the new prison governor at Bedford HM prison, and had a really interesting conversation with him. So I probably wouldn't have met him otherwise. And then at the recent Bunyan Basement exhibition, 75th anniversary of the Bunyan Museum, a couple of weeks ago, I caught up with Eric Massey, who's the new High Sheriff of Beds, who I wanted to speak to anyway about a couple of things, because he's very active in Queen's Park, which I try and keep in touch with Queen's Park community organisation. So although it's easy to ignore those invites, it's kind of, if you can go, it's helpful, although, like I say, the time often isn't available. And also I go to some ceremonial events, but are very much of my own choosing. So the Red Poppy Reads one is a no from me because of the sort of militarisation around it. Not because I don't respect military personnel or people who've died, but I don't like the military, the marching of young people with weapons. I don't like that, and I don't want to be seen to celebrate that, but I will remember people in my own way. But something I have been to is the Anne Frank Holocaust Memorial Day ceremony at the Tree in Russell Park, and that's just up the road to me, so that was always a nice thing to do. And also tomorrow, I think it's tomorrow, or is it Friday, I'm going to the Emergency Services Day flag raising, because I think that's particularly pertinent this year, and that's just 15 minutes of my time before work, but it's a sort of symbolic thing that is nice to go to, and also, to be honest, to be seen to support, because we do want to be seen to support those people. So was it worth it, all this? Well, I think we are making a difference, as Ben says, but sometimes only small, and there are obstacles, but even just being in the room, it's a kind of a cliche, but even just being a green in the room, it does kind of help shift the direction of the conversation. So, you know, we can continue to hold the council to account on the climate emergency declaration in particular. And we've got good relationships with the local press now. So although we are only two Greens, we do try and take those opportunities to sort of amplify the Green Party message. And being the first Greens here does make that easier, I think, because we're still sort of a novelty in a way. And I think despite being only two Greens, we do punch above our weight. So the recent chief exec, who's now no longer, because we've got a new chief exec, but he did say, oh, we had a meeting with him, didn't we, Ben? Was it back in July? And he said, oh, I hear you're quite vocal. Yes, I've been listening to you. You both of you have quite a lot to say, don't you, at meetings? And we said, well, there are only two of us, so we feel like we have to make sure we're always questioning and always challenging, and, you know, we're not just going to sit quietly. Like many other councillors in meetings, I find say nothing at all, and I find it quite extraordinary. I know they're good people, and I know they have opinions, but many of them don't say anything. And I think your job is there to challenge and question, not for the sake of it, but there are always questions to ask. So whether it's on, you know, the budget or the council cuts to essential services at full council in the spring, or environmental issues or inequality made more severe by the pandemic, those are always things that we will we will raise, and you know, just try and make sure that there's no complacency by the council or the executive. And so I think that's about it. You can see we don't really have much free time for anything else.
Thanks, Lucy. So it'd be really interesting to hear from Gareth the similarities and differences from his time as a mid-beds councillor, you know, and you know, also Gareth, if you've got anything you can say about having been on the planning committee, which is one that we don't have any inside knowledge of, that would be really interesting.
Okay, Ben, thanks. Yes, as Ben says, I was a district councillor, not a unitary councillor. This is back in the days before the unitary councils. So I was a district councillor on Mid Bedfordshire Council. Actually only for 2 years, because the system was changed after 2 years, and the council was abolished. But yes, I joined it as a single Green Party councillor. I wouldn't have got onto the planning committee if it hadn't been for teaming up with 3 independents. So there were 3 independents voted onto the council at the same time, and they were quite keen to join a group. The advantage of having a group of any size is that you get a say then in terms of what committees you get allocated to. So I think I was lucky. I might have otherwise just been on the licensing committee, which as Lucy says, wouldn't have been very interesting. So I was voted onto I was selected onto the planning or the development control committee, as they called it. And yeah, it was really interesting. I think one of the reasons I was voted in the first place was to do with planning issues. It's quite contentious in our village, a small rural village in the middle of Bedfordshire. Lots of sort of pressure from development. So it's really interesting to be on the committee and work alongside other councillors. It's hardly ever party political. It was very interesting that the council was dominated very much by Conservatives. They had an overwhelming majority, and then there were a few Lib Dems, and then us in the Independent and Green group. But it was interesting to see the Tories very much falling out amongst themselves, much more than the rest of us did. So it was very easy to get on with some of the other councillors and work quite closely with some Conservative councillors and some Lib Dem councillors. Planning issues, yeah, Ben mentioned the paperwork. We used to get sort of paperwork that thick for one committee meeting. Obviously, if it's a planning issue, you can to some extent be selective. You need to work out early on which are the ones where there's a chance of having some influence and some arguments, and which are the ones to ignore because they're pretty much a done deal. And you need to learn the technicalities of it as well, as to the fact that planning applications need to fit in with the local plan and with planning policy in general. And it's understanding those nuances of how that's going to be applied, where you can sort of make a difference and you can argue a case. The council was always very wary of turning down applications where they were up against a developer who might take it to appeal. There's always the jeopardy that if it goes to appeal, that there may be costs awarded against the council if it goes the wrong way. So you have to be pretty well argued, and it has to be well researched and well thought out. When I was on the council, it was the early days of developing the new local plan, which has only just come to fruition now for Central Bedfordshire, but developing the local plan for Mid Bedfordshire at the time. And they were going through policy on gypsy and traveller sites in the local plan, and that was quite a contentious issue where I had no choice but to get involved, because 7 sites were actually being proposed in or around the ward that I represented. So there was pressure on that side of things that obviously local people didn't want. I say obviously, but it was the case that local people didn't want a gypsy traveller site near to them. Having said that, there were 2 small Gypsy Traveller sites within the ward. They were no trouble to anyone. They actually met the criteria for the Tory policy that they developed, which was to go down the road of small privately owned sites, privately managed as opposed to council run, which I thought was a sensible policy, you know, in the context of rural mid-Bedfordshire. And I could see it working locally. So I championed those 2 sites and actually helped to get one of them through towards planning permission, which didn't go down well with all local people, but I think they were more than happy that the 5 other sites, which actually would have had a much bigger impact and not been suitable and were not sustainable, where it didn't go through. I work very closely in my ward. There are 2 parish councils. I think if you're in a rural council, it's very important you work with the parish councils. You certainly don't want to be working against them. They're your local eyes and ears. They'll tell you about the important things that they want dealing with locally, and generally speaking, they've got a good idea of what's on the ground. I had the advantage of also when I ran for district councillor, I also ran for parish councillor, so I was a parish councillor on one of the parish councils anyway. I've remained a parish councillor since. Actually, being a parish councillor is in some ways more interesting than being a district councillor because you get to deal with a wider range of issues. District councils are fairly narrow in the sense that you're dealing with planning issues, housing, and waste collection, licensing. It's much narrower than the role that Lucy and Ben have got, which is the combination of district and county councillor, which is
and similarly any central beds councillor would have the same sort of role that we've got now.
So I would comment on that you need to be very careful about your time. I did the district councillor role as working full-time and with a young family, and I did come under extreme time pressure. So I wasn't able to do the door knocking bit, the part that Lucy and Ben have been doing. I did rely very much on my contacts. I was a local school governor as well. So through the parish council and being school governor, I had lots of sort of day-to-day contact with people to understand what local issues were. I did deal with individual cases. People did seek me out, and I tried to help them where I could. But I think, for a district councillor, they were suggesting you might need a day a week to undertake the role. So God knows how Lucy and Ben are coping, because their role is 3-4 times bigger in reality. Of course, in some respects, you can work it to fit what you can do, and you can be selective. I think there's no harm in that, but you're probably looking to have a sort of a bit of a support network around you of people that you can rely on and who you can work with. And I had that as a parish councillor. I had some really good contacts, and they helped me. I did make 1 or 2 notes. What else was I going to say? Yeah, I think Lucy said, being the green in the room is quite useful, because people are a bit more careful then about how they talk and are perceived in when they start talking about green issues. I had several individual, actually Tory councillors, coming up to me saying that they were really green and they really supported what the Green Party was about, but the reality of local politics was they had to do things through the Tory Party, which was interesting. And so they did come to me. Also, I'm an environmentalist, so I've got technical knowledge. So both on the officer side and councillor side, I did have people coming to me for technical advice. And the local officers did use me when developing the local plan, looking at their renewable energy policies and so on, because of my technical input. So it's interesting, but I don't know if they'd done that if it wasn't for the fact I was a Green Party and they could sort of see for sure where my heart lay, as it were. Yeah, I think I've covered most of the points, the notes I got down here. It was a while ago, so forgive me if I've forgotten anything. Yeah, if anybody wants to contact me, and I'm sure Ben and Lucy are up for it as well, happy to talk one-to-one about the role.
Thanks, Gareth. It was really good to get a sort of third perspective on things as well. You know, because Lucy and I have sort of got a bit of the way we do things and all the rest of it, and it's not always the only way that things can be done.
Yeah, and it is. I think it is different. You're in Bedford Borough, which obviously has got rural hinterland, but you're very much looking at it from the urban perspective in your ward.
Yeah,
it is quite a bit different being in a rural ward. The extra dimension is the parish council, I think, and obviously some of the the issues are going to be different as well.
I can completely see how that will make a big difference. Yeah. So sort of coming back to what was being talked about earlier. Can I find my notes? Oh yeah, a couple of things that sort of struck me from what you were saying, Lucy. One of the things I've felt from being the sort of community leadership role is at times I've sort of felt perhaps under a little bit more pressure, self-pressure, I don't know, to be responsible. And so things like publicising when I got my jabs for the vaccine, making sure that some of the key messages around COVID get passed on and stuff like that. Being aware that it could be more embarrassing if I'm caught breaking the rules than it would be a typical person. And on a different topic, you said about the question of choice of committees and all the rest of it, both of you. I think one of the differences is that you managed to get together a group of 4 of you, Gareth. Mm-hmm. Whereas we've only been considered as a group of 2 of us when it comes to committee allocations. And the way that's worked out so far in Bedford is that our only choice is, okay, these are the committees that are allocated to the Green Party group. Which of you is going to take which? But I was sort of aware that if we can get to the stage of increasing the number, then we start getting a bit more choice and flexibility. And it's sort of good to hear that your experience bore that out to some extent.
Definitely. Yeah.
It's interesting what you say about the kind of responsibility then of during COVID. And I think you always have a sense of a councillor as if you're being kind of scrutinized as you go about your business. If you're I cycle everywhere, and if I was to cycle on the pavement for 10 feet just up into my final destination or to a bike rack, I feel as if someone might leap on me and go, oh, you cycled that small route. It's a silly thing, but you are potentially the object of potential criticism for people who want to criticize you for the sake of it. It hasn't happened very much, actually, but there are a small number of people who they are not Green supporters, in fact the opposite. And so there is that responsibility, but as you say, COVID makes the responsibility much greater in terms of being community leader. One of the downsides, I don't want to sort of finish off by being negative, but one of the downsides of being councillor, I think, is maybe this is just me, but I find it difficult to ever switch off. So you're going around the ward, you're going, because I'm in the ward because it's town centre, And it's difficult to ignore any little issue and not think, oh, let's take a photo of that, must sort it, must report it, or there's a problem. I know you do the same, Ben, and it's difficult to switch off and just relax, even if I'm sitting outside a cafe and I'm thinking, there's a problem over there, there's a guy dealing drugs and he's just gone up that alleyway, there's definitely an issue up there. It's just things like that that I find difficult to switch off. And I suppose if you've been for councillor for 20 years, you manage to compartmentalise. But when I've left Bedford, as I have done this summer a couple of times, went up north, found it incredibly liberating, because I didn't have to notice any fly tipping or drug dealing. Well, there wasn't any drug dealing, to be honest, but not that I saw, but I didn't have to be responsible. And you need that break from being always that sense of responsibility. This is my patch. I have to make sure it's looked after. But part of that also is encouraging other locals to help you by also reporting things and also noticing things, which we are doing.
I think you've been much better at that than I have been, Lucy.
Well, today, I don't want to tell you what I got. Someone reported me today because it's too disgusting, but they did send a photo of it. And I thought, because it wasn't cleared up, I thought maybe I should go and clear it up. And then I thought, actually, no, because this is not my job to go and sort out that really disgusting problem. And I had reported it online, but I was able to share with the resident, next time you can report it online this way. And she didn't know that. So that was useful. But yeah, sometimes there's a temptation to try and, for speed, to nip out and fix something yourself, which we sometimes do, don't we? But I think you have to have some kind of, you can't always do everything, and it would be foolish to try. And we don't want to burn out. We do the best that we can. But yeah, switching off at some point, I will learn how to do that. It's not easy.
The other thing I would say, just going back to doing it as somebody who was working full time, I was lucky, I think, on both occasions, because I changed employer actually when I was a councillor. My first employer, I was a consultant, and I was able to buy extra leave, days leave, to do some of the council work. And then I joined the university, and the university actually gives 15 days for volunteering. I.e. being a school governor or being a councillor. So that was extremely helpful. So if anybody's considering doing this, then just have a look at the package that your employer offers and see whether there isn't an angle there in terms of whether you can free up some time.
That's a really good point. I don't think you can be a borough councillor, a good borough councillor, and work full-time, a standard job. I don't see how you could do it. I've reduced my hours since being elected, and also I have a boss who's very flexible, and my job can be quite flexible anyway, so I can make up time at a weekend or evenings. But I don't see how you could really do it full-time. I mean, apart from anything else, obviously most meetings are in the evenings, but there are things, for example, police meetings and Midland Road Action Group meetings that we used to go to before COVID, or walks with police where you're scoping things out, things like that. They're during the day, and you have to kind of take an hour out here and out, half an hour there. Not every week, but they do take up time. I don't see how you could do a 40 hour.
Yeah, I don't understand, but I know that there are other councillors here in Bedford that have full-time jobs and say, yes, I can do it having a full-time job. And I can't figure out what's going on there.
No,
but
I didn't used to have a lunch hour from work, and I don't still really, but now I will take 20 minutes out of my working day on the days where I'm working for my employer, and I'll use those minutes to eat my sandwich or whatever I'm eating, and I will go through my council emails to try and thin them out and answer quick things because otherwise they're just backing up in the evening, and I like to just sort things out quickly to stay on top of them. And I don't understand how you could, especially not for Castle Ward, maybe for a quieter rural ward, but Castle Ward, we've got so many issues with, just so many issues, and also the whole town centre issues and planning things we're trying to keep on top of, and licensing things and criminal sort of things, deprivation issues. I don't know
To some extent, Lucy, it is what you make of it. And if dare I say, you're from a particular party and it's a safe seat, then you can probably sit back, and just as long as you turn up to the minimum requirement of attendance for meetings.
Yeah.
Which isn't very high.
You're right, because you'll still be re-elected having done very little,
or maybe not. It depends if anybody could suss that out and target that particular ward.
Yeah. But yeah, it is very demanding of time. But you're right, there is a certain, you can decide how much you do once you've done all the essential things that we've talked about, you know, the committee meetings and everything. For example, there are things that I've taken on that I didn't have to do at all. The corporate parenting one was something that I was moved to do after meeting a young woman in care who gave a talk to the council, and I was just really moved by that, and I straight away wanted to be on the corporate parenting panel. It's only once every 6 weeks, so and so it's not very onerous, and you know, the papers aren't, well, actually the papers are normally about 80 to 100 pages, but it's a real learning exercise, and I think it applies to so many other things in the ward as well, because we have obviously homelessness and, you know, issues around, you know, we have all sorts of issues with young people that it's really useful that I'm on it, I think. So, but even after I'd volunteered, I did think, oh, am I going to be able to do this? Why did I volunteer for this? But it's good to have boundaries and say, right, I'm not going to take any more now. So I have been asked to be on committees outside the council in the last few months because I'm a councillor. People have gone, oh, can you come on our committee? And I've said, I'm really sorry, but I have to say no, because I won't be able to do it justice, and I won't be any good to you because I don't have the time. I would love to, but I just don't have the time. And actually, it's really important to say no sometimes, rather than think you can squeeze something in and not do it justice at all. So it's a learning curve, isn't it, for me anyway?
Maybe we'll get the hang of it one day.
Maybe, yes. It's halfway through our term.
Oh.
So, yeah.
More than.
Yeah, but I think COVID has been positive. Well, I don't want to say positive, but being a councillor through COVID has it's been a steep learning curve, but we've learned a lot, I think, haven't we, because of the situation. And it's I feel like it's challenged us in many ways, but I feel I've developed skills that I perhaps didn't have before. I am developing.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, Lucy. We've developed skills.
Yes, or developing. It's an ongoing process. But yeah.
Do we have any more? Has Philippa had any questions she's thought of to ask us, or?
Well, I guess the only thing that I've really got to ask you is, will you be standing at the next election?
I can't imagine that I won't be.
Likewise.
With Castle Ward being split, I think now into 4 parts for the 5. Is that right? 4 parts for the next election. There's certainly a fair choice about where, but
I can't imagine not standing again, because I think once you've done 4 years, you know, the first year is incredibly tough. It's so tough. I was exhausted most of the time, and just from learning, because you have all this training and you're just trying to learn who is who, where you go, how things are done, or just all the sort of practical things, how to manage your time. And you know, you're trying to learn about so many issues, from, you know, social care to, you know, recycling and everything in between. So I think you kind of, after 4 years, you feel like you've learned so much. It would be almost a shame not to stand again, even though many friends and family would love it if I didn't stand again, because they just feel it takes up too much of my time. But yeah, I can't imagine not standing, I think, in 2023.
One of the thoughts that I've got is I'd really like us to be in the position where we can help someone new to learn the ropes on the council.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, rather than us running away and they've got to start back from where we were 2 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, if we look at Peterborough, they had 2 strong councillors and now they've got 3. It's obviously it'd be great to have 5 or 6. But yeah, that's what we need. We need.
Not easy to achieve, but we can work on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, what difference would it have made if when you joined the council there'd already been 2 Green councillors on the council? Would have made a big difference to your startup, I would imagine.
Yeah.
A lot more info about how to get things done, who the right person to ask about this and that is. There's still a lot where each of us is asking the other, do you know who to contact about this?
Yes. Yeah. And then you get to know that person and there's a really useful, helpful person, and then you realise they've left a year later when you're contacting them for the 20th time, and you can see from their email they no longer work at the council. And that's kind of devastating because you think, now I have to try and find out who the right person is. So a lot of it is finding out who the right person is in terms of their role, but also in terms of who's the most responsive and helpful, because not all officers are as helpful or as
theory and practice aren't always the same.
yeah, exactly. But yes, having 2 forerunners who knew the ropes would have made the world of difference. Yeah, and it's worth remembering as well. I think a lot of people don't realise that the other groups with 5 councillors or more, they get a paid researcher, so they have someone to do a lot of the legwork, to do bits of research for them, help them with consultations, which we haven't talked about, but Ben puts an incredible amount of work into consultations for the local plan and housing strategy, things like that. Ward boundaries as well.
As the advantage of not having other work, at least I've got some time to do some of that more in-depth stuff.
Well, you do it very well in depth and with great attention to detail, and I think if we had a researcher who could take on some of that, and that would be a game changer. So if there were 5 of us, and
it's not as simple as 5, unfortunately, Lucy. But
is it not? Oh, I thought it was.
No, it's the 3 biggest parties.
Oh, okay. So, is that ever going to happen? Yes, that will happen.
It can happen, but I'm not sure which of the 3 is the one that we would be ousting yet.
Yeah, in Bedford, it's not. Yeah, it's not.
Yeah, when we've got the Lib Dem directly elected mayor and then a Labour MP and Tory MPs, all within the borough, it's not entirely easy to see which one's going to be the one that will fall by the wayside for us. We're going to make it happen somehow, though.
Yeah, it would be different in central Beds where it's mostly Tory, wouldn't it? But we are where we are.
It should be much easier to be the 3rd largest party in central Beds.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Well, not planning to move though.
Yeah, the independents have quite a big sway in central Beds. I'm not sure if they're the 2nd biggest group. There's 9 of them, isn't there?
I think so. Yes, I've met some of them at the LGA, and Victoria Harvey is one of them as well, isn't she? Yeah,
and Mary Walsh. There's a number of them are fairly green-minded. You can imagine them in the Green Party, but there's a number who aren't. But nevertheless, it would be an interesting discussion, I think, to be had with them if we had 1 or 2 Green councillors to actually team up with the independent group. That might actually leverage the influence.
Yeah, definitely.
But do you have any messages for any Green Party members or supporters on how they would be able to get involved to maybe help you guys?
It's a good question. We need help with all sorts of things. So if anyone is interested in helping, we have things that are very light on time, or we have out and about physical, door knocking with us and leafleting, or we have roles that are behind a desk for people who aren't so mobile or who have less time or have time perhaps in the evenings. So we have a multitude of roles, don't we, really, that we would welcome help with.
And that there's the web form, so hopefully with this video there can be a link to that form. I should think somehow we'll manage to arrange that.
And if anyone's interested in being as a councillor, the sooner they come and talk to us, the better, so we can answer any questions they still have, or encourage them to come forward.
Yeah, the election might seem a long way away, but in terms of actually successfully getting someone elected, it isn't that far away.
Not at all. Yeah, not at all far away. So have we finished for?
I think you
Yeah.
probably
Sorry?
Well, thanks so much for your time, Gareth and Lucy, and also Philippa. Thank you for hosting for us and sitting there listening to us droning on.
no problem, anytime.